Beside the Brook, the story of someone who found the truth, written by McDonald. Beside the Brook, Chapter 3, A Tea Party. Thursday came, and the children were very busy in the garden, weeding and hoeing, to make the time pass quickly till 5:30, when they were due for tea at the shepherd's home. Mother understood at last all about Teddy Ting-tong, and father too had become interested, for he had heard from Farmer Wilmot about the coming of the sheep and the character of the old shepherd. "He's different from the labourers round here, and keeps to himself," the farmer had said. "I got to hear of him at Salisbury Market. He has been working his way south for some years, and now I'm lucky enough to have engaged him for a time. He has a way with sheep, and I fancy that he's an authority on other matters as well." So Peggy and John had been allowed to tell Mr. Ting-tong that they could come to tea on Thursday. "But, my dears," said Mother, "it is hardly polite to call your friend by such an undignified name." "He doesn't mind," said Peggy. "Children shouldn't call their elders nicknames," pursued Mother. "Didn't he tell you his proper name?" "No, Mother," replied both children. "He said Teddy Ting-tong would do. We told him we made it up." "Well, ask him again if he minds," cautioned Mother. The lovely afternoon wore on slowly. Peggy fetched the milk, and John had an idea. "I'll go fetch Teddy Ting-tong's too," he said, "to save his time." That put another idea into their heads, for kind thoughts are as catching as measles. "We'll collect some wood for his fire. That will be a surprise for him," said Peggy. Mother gave John a pot of gooseberry jam and Peggy a blackberry and apple tart to take to their new friend. They arrived half an hour too soon, but filled in the time pleasantly enough, collecting a pile of fir cones and dry wood for the fire. "Wouldn't it be nice to have the kettle boiling for him?" said John. "Oh, yes," said Peggy, "if we can find it." They searched about, and in an opening among the blackthorn bushes quite near, they discovered the pantry. 2 little posts with bars across like a gate held Teddy's pots, pans, and a kettle, hanging tidily on nails. "Here it is," announced Peggy proudly. Then, unhooking it, she stopped to think. "I don't suppose the brook water is clean enough to drink, even if boiled," she said wisely, "especially as the brook is nearly dry. I know. I'll get some water from the dairy. That's nearer than going home, and you go and ask Mother for some matches." They both flew off, Peggy being careful that the black kettle did not touch her clean blue-checked frock. The dairy was all adrip after its daily cleansing. Clean pools lay between the white flagstones. Churns and cans stood waiting to be taken away. A cat with 2 kittens, one tabby and one ginger, lurked around, and the fat ginger one took a fancy to Peggy's brown legs. She saw no one to ask permission, so she pumped a kettle full of water, but so much came out that it drenched her frock. Knowing it would soon dry, she didn't mind, and arrived back at the hut just as John appeared with the matches. "I told Mother what we were going to do," he said, "and she made me promise to be careful with the fire." They hung the kettle on the hook, pushed some brown gorse prickles in the fireplace, and set them alight. How they crackled! But there was no time to lose in admiration, or the flames would die out. So they laid a stick at a time on the red ash, until a steady blaze leapt up round the kettle. "This is just grand!" exclaimed John, ignoring the heat that was roasting him. "I'll dry my frock," said Peggy, standing close to it. The kettle began to sing. John had just found a long iron rod bent round at one end to make a handle, which was obviously the poker, when they heard the kind voice of Teddy Ting-Tong behind them. "Well, well, my bairns, if that isn't good of you. You fetched the milk and got the kettle boiling. You will enjoy tea all the more for your thoughtfulness." If Peggy and John could have blushed with pleasure, they might have done so, but they were so heated with the fire that they could not turn any redder. "Mother sent you this," said John, offering the gooseberry jam. "And this is a fruit tart Mother made," said Peggy, picking up the dish tied round with a serviette. A group of ants and some green acorns had settled on the top, but she brushed them off before presenting the bundle to Teddy. He did not reply for a moment, and they wondered why. "My dears," he said at last, taking the gifts, "you have a good, kind mother, and I don't deserve it, but thank you, thank you." Placing them on the top of the doorstep ladder, he produced a key and opened the door. The children forgot the kettle in their anxiety to peep inside, and followed the shepherd. "There's no much room inside," he said. "I suppose you'd rather have tea indoors than outside?" he asked. "Oh, yes, please," cried both children, who could not bear the thought of waiting any longer before going in. "It's close today," said Teddy, opening the window. "The tea is already laid, so we won't be long. But if you don't mind waiting a wee while, would you like some mushrooms I found in the field?" "We love mushrooms," cried Peggy, speaking for both. "We'll help you to peel them." Teddy Ting-Tong undid his straw bag, and from it took handfuls of small, fresh mushrooms. Spreading them on a newspaper outside the hut, the three fell to peeling them. "They're nice and clean," observed Peggy. "Yes," said Teddy. "You see, I cut them off with a knife in gathering them. You'll get no soil on the stalk that way, and you don't weaken the growth either." Soon an appetizing smell of frying bacon and sizzling mushrooms was wafted along the brook. Peggy watched the frying pan while Teddy brewed the tea. The meal was served on plates round the fire, and then in procession each carried a plate up into the hen-house, Teddy leading the way and carrying the teapot as well. A tiny table was fixed to the wall below the window. A small wicker chair stood at one end, and a wooden stool at the front. The table was covered with shining American cloth, and laid for three with crocks of different patterns. Teddy's cup had a pattern of gold clover-leaf. Peggy's was gay with rosebuds, and John's was festooned with a green garland supported by lovers' knots. A crusty loaf sat squarely on a breadboard, almost asking the knife beside it to get busy. Bright watercress looked as if it were growing out of a glass pot, and a lump of yellow butter shone through the lid of a glass dish. To these Teddy added a plate of delicious raisin buns stuck about with baked candy peel. "That stool will be big enough for the two of you," said Teddy, easing it from the table. "Peggy, my dear, you milk and sugar the cups." Peggy was only too pleased. She had to stand to do so, and nearly pushed John off the stool in getting up, but he was too blissfully happy to mind anything. Teddy cut the bread, poured out the tea, and John was about to attack the tempting bacon and mushrooms, which he feared were getting cold, when the shepherd bowed his head and reverently said, "O Lord, who lovest all thy creatures, we thank thee for this food. May we rejoice in the strength that it brings to us, that we may continue to serve thee through Jesus Christ. Amen." The children were surprised. At school they chanted an incantation which included the words, "These creatures bless," before going home to dinner, and on Christmas Day Daddy said grace. which they regarded as an address to the roast chicken which they were about to enjoy, but the meaning of it all had not occurred to them. They had not thought to give thanks for every meal. Somehow the idea seemed to fit in well with the white-haired shepherd and his simple home. How good everything tasted! The children had never enjoyed a tea party so much. "Where did you get the watercress?" asked Peggy. "There's a fair-sized bed growing near yon clump of willows where the brook joins the river," said Teddy. "Mother tried to grow some in the brook near us," continued Peggy, "but the coot pecked it till it stopped growing." "I'll show you the watercress beds sometime," said the shepherd. "Thank you, Mr. Ting-Tong," said John. Peggy looked up. "Do you mind us calling you Teddy Ting-Tong?" she asked. "Mother says it's not polite for children to call their elders funny names." Teddy laughed. "Some folks would mind," he said, "but they don't a wee bit. Besides, Edward is one of my names, and the other doesn't matter." This made Peggy all the more curious. But by this time they had come to the bun stage of the party, and she forgot everything else. "It's a long time since I had children around my table," said Teddy, when they had finished the meal, and John was wondering how much longer he could sit on the stool, as Peggy had most of the room. "Did you ever have any children?" asked Peggy, turning her round blue eyes on the old man. For an answer he replied, "I'll tell you a story one day," and started to clear the table. Peggy soon showed what a good little helper she was by handing the things to Teddy, as he stowed them away in a three-cornered cupboard covered with perforated zinc. "Put down the table," said Teddy to John, who quickly discovered a movable bracket underneath, which, when pushed back to the wall, allowed the table to hang down, making a good deal more room. "We'll wash the dishes now," said Teddy, "and then we'll have a chat." There was still hot water in the kettle for this task, which seemed much more interesting in Teddy's household than at home, and after packing the crocks away, the three re-entered the house. "Sit down," said Teddy. John sat cross-legged on a little red hassock he found, leaving the stool for Peggy, while their host occupied the only chair. A very small grate with iron bars was fixed into the wall opposite the table. That accounted for the chimney pot that bent out under the eaves. A kind of shelf stretched across the back of the house, and as it was piled with neatly folded blankets and partly hidden by a green curtain, the children guessed that it was Teddy's bed. A flat wall vase hung beside the window, and from it trailed a few long tendrils of honeysuckle, which filled the room with a sweet smell. A big trunk rested on the floor beneath the bunk, and on it were ranged Teddy's straw-dinner bag, a pair of new boots, and some books, one of which was a Bible. The children's eyes missed nothing, and when they travelled to the photograph above the grate of a very sweet old lady with a bunch of lace and a big brooch beneath her chin, Teddy smiled and answered, as if they had asked the question, "Who is that?" by saying, "That was Mother." A clock ticked loudly somewhere, and looking up, they discovered it perched upon one of the rafters across the roof. John took an immediate fancy to the ceiling, which sloped up to a central ridge, and was supported by several more rafters on which reposed more books. 6 small holes were drilled below the eaves for ventilation. From the ceiling the children's eyes glanced to the floor, which was covered with a rush mat and a little red rug. Teddy noticed their approving glances, and said he hoped they felt quite at home. They really did, and told him all about their own home, how their father grew things for market in his big garden, about the bees, Mother's hens, and the pig, all about school and the children they met there.
"There aren't any children living near us," explained Peggy, "so we play together." "On Sundays we go to church," put in John. "Do you?"
"No," said Teddy Ting-Tong, "I don't." Both children looked up in surprise, and John was just about to say, "Are you a heathen?" when he remembered the little prayer Teddy had said before tea. At that moment there arose a plaintive little cry from beneath the hut. The three felt silent to listen. "Mew, mew," it came again. "It's a cat," said Peggy, jumping up and running to the door. The others followed and saw a fat ginger kitten looking up the steps, his tail quivering on high. "Why, it's the kitten from the dairy," she exclaimed. "Pussy, Pussy, come here." The kitten sprang up the bottom steps, turned round and jumped down again. Peggy went down and picked it up. "You pretty little dear," she said. "You must have followed me when I went to fill the kettle. Now we'll have to take you back." "Bring him in," said Teddy. "We'll give him some milk." The kitten took a long time to lap a little, then wandered round the hut, and at last climbed into one of the boots. "He looks as if he wants to stay," said John. "We'll all take him home presently," said Teddy Ting-Tong. "He won't find his way home alone. Thank you, mother, for the nice things," he added as they prepared to go. "Take the cloth that the pie was wrapped in, and I'll return the dish when it's empty." John wondered how soon they would be invited again as they set off for the farm, Peggy carrying the kitten. The mother cat was nowhere to be seen, so they placed the kitten inside the farmhouse fence near the back door. The little thing seemed most ungrateful for being taken home and tried to climb the fence. "No, we must hurry off or he'll be after us," said Teddy. So hastening round the barn, the children said good night to their friend and thanked him for the happy time they had spent with him. Beside the Brook, Chapter 4, Harvest Time. September came with its misty mornings and Michaelmas daisies, and a freshness in the air indicated that summer would soon come to an end. The brook was flowing again, the burnished acorns and hazelnuts set in yellowing ruffles were growing plump, and the wild birds were heavy with feeding on the plentiful fruits of the fields and woods. The shilling, as Teddy Ting-Tong called his home, had become part of the scenery. Late foxgloves bloomed beside the shafts, and convolvulus wound itself round the wheels, while a robin, whose territory this happened to be, perched upon the roof and sang at intervals during the day. Peggy and John had returned to school, and as the evenings were growing shorter, they could not spend much time beside the brook. But they managed to find time to see Teddy Ting-Tong, who, besides attending to his flock, was busy helping with the harvest. He spent the whole day in the fields, his face becoming even browner, and when the last of the corn was stacked in huge ricks to await the thrashing machine, he helped in lifting the root crops to be stored for cattle food in winter. Someone was at the shieling now to welcome his returns at night. That was Ginger the kitten, who ever since the tea party had persisted in following Teddy home every time he fetched his milk, until the dairy folk agreed that the shepherd had better keep him. Ginger had several snug places in which to spend the time till evening, according to the weather. His favourite spot was a bed of dry fern under the shieling, where he used to turn around and around, padding with his feet before settling down like a leopard in the jungle. When Teddy returned, he would rouse himself, lay his head on his stretched-out paws, and then rub around the gaiters, waiting for his ears to be tickled. At mealtimes and bedtime he would mount to the steps in front of Teddy and walk into the hut as though he had first right to it. The children were delighted at Ginger's entry into their friend's home, and Peggy considered that she had put the idea into his funny little head. Sometimes they stopped to play with him after leaving a basket of apples or a marrow under the house, for father insisted that Teddy Ting-Tong should be supplied with garden produce. As the old man was not allowed to pay for it, he used to pop a coin at a time into a cocoa tin that served as a money box, hoping that one day he would be able to compensate someone for other folks' kindness. There was one autumn event that the children looked forward to immensely. That was their harvest festival in the village church. Eagerly they helped to decorate the day before, with sunflowers, Michaelmas daisies, and red leaves from their garden. People brought boat baskets full of vegetables, potatoes with mauve and white jackets, carrots and turnips with scrubbed faces, marrows fit to burst, onions with crackly coats, and bushels of apples. All these were stacked at the back by the door till the church smelt like a greengrocer's shop or a flower show. Father Wilmot sent sheaves of oats and barley, and some very big loaves, and a large number of brown eggs, while Mr. Spears, who had a flourishing greenhouse, sent bunches of grapes which shone green and blue in a nest of wood wool. What a mess there was to be cleared up on the church floor after the decorations were finished. All the Broom family, and in fact the whole village, turned out to attend the services on Harvest Thanksgiving Day, though for many it was the only occasion during the year that they felt the need or made the effort to praise God and thank him in company. Peggy loved to see the morning sunlight stream through the stained glass windows and make rainbow colours on the floor, making more lovely the reds and purples of the dahlias and asters. And when the evening sunshine shone golden through the west window, the sheaves and marigolds glowed as if they were on fire. Joyfully and lustily everyone sang the old harvest hymn, "Come, ye thankful people, come, raise the song of harvest home," though the farmers produced more noise than harmony, and the deaf blacksmith was always out of tune. Everyone enjoyed himself, and the social aspect of the festival was continued afterwards in the churchyard outside by cheerful conversation, while a big moon swam up in the sky to lighten the way home. "Teddy," said the children next day when they sought him out at sundown, "you ought to have come to the harvest festival. You would have loved the hymns. You should have seen what we collected to send to the hospital." Teddy was sitting on the top step of the shieling peeling potatoes for his supper. Pausing with the knife in one hand and a potato in the other, he looked at the children and smiled. "I couldna go to yon kirk," he said, "though no one loves better than I to sing those fine old harvest hymns." "Why ever not?" asked Peggy. "Because I don't believe the same as the folk who go there. That's why," replied Teddy. "Don't you believe in God, then?" asked John, sorely puzzled. "Of course I do, laddie," smiled the shepherd, noticing the concerned look on the boy's face. "But we must worship God with understanding. His book teaches something different from everyday preaching, and it provides my daily reading." "And have you got a prayer book?" asked Peggy, remembering her own bound in soft red leather with gilt edges. "No, I gave up the prayer book a long time ago. It is the work of men. The Bible is the word of God, and his word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path," replied Teddy. "Do you read it every day?" asked John. "It's a very long book with hundreds of pages." "Yes, every day," said Teddy Ting-Tong. "Not straight through, but according to a plan. Wait a while and I'll show you," he said, putting down the potato bowl and going inside. They returned with a big worn Bible which seemed to open in set places as if by habit. The inside covers were closely inscribed, and many verses were underlined. In the middle was a little book like a calendar with no covers. "This tells me what to read every day," said Teddy, "and if I do what it tells me, I don't miss one of God's words in a year."
"How wonderful," said Peggy. "Where did you get it?"
"I found it," replied the old man, "in a book I bought from a stall in the market, and it helped me to read the Bible that Mother left behind when she died."
"I should like a little book like that," said Peggy. "I have a Bible, but I only read little bits of it. I started at the beginning once, but there was so much and it was so difficult that I left off." "We know where to find the stories about Jesus," put in John. "Yes, that's in the New Testament," said Peggy. "I think the New Testament is more important than the Old."
"Never," said Teddy decidedly. "They go together. The books of the Old Testament were the only scriptures that Jesus read, and he could speak from them by heart."
"Do you understand the Bible?" asked John.
"I think I'm beginning to know," replied the shepherd. "I've loved it all my life, and now I believe its truth is coming to me in my old age."
"But the people who go to church read the Bible," protested Peggy.
"Do they?" asked Teddy. "You mean they'll listen to a set chapter or two on Sundays? I guarantee that only a few, if any, have read it right through. God's word is a locked treasure. Everyone has the key, but will not trouble to unlock it."
"Who told you?"
asked Peggy. "No one has told me, but I'm finding it out, and I pray that I may have light. Maybe some day I'll find someone to help me find out more." Teddy Ting-Tong resumed his potato peeling. Ginger appeared under his elbow trying to create a game, and the children jumped up as a skirmish in the rafters said it was 7 o'clock.
"Teddy is a good man, isn't he, Peggy?"
asked John on the way home.
"Yes,"
said his sister.
"He reminds me of the picture of Moses in my Bible."
"We must tell Mother what he says,"